You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. On the first part of this Halloween special, I'm delighted to welcome back author Ruth Roper Wylde. This time, however, we're going to discuss some of the strange and unusual experiences that have peppered Ruth's life. From ghostly cats to weird grinning creatures, and even a ghost in a toilet, we uncover some incredible stories. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mysteriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. You can also click the link in the show notes as usual. Thank you to my latest patrons, Sig, Mike, and Nocturne Alley, and thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support me and the show with your contributions. You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com. You can also visit our exclusive merchandise site at TeePublic, and the link to that is in the show notes as well, and our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Now, let's join Ruth to discover some of her haunted history. It's not really Halloween on Mysteries and Monsters without a chat with our favourite chronicler of ghost stories, with a new volume of these haunted times on its way. I'm delighted to welcome back Ruth Roper Wylde. Ruth, welcome!
Hi, so good to be back. Love coming on this show. Can't wait to be talking about all these things tonight.
Lovely. Well, it's always nice to be having you in my company again and diving into the strange world of the paranormal. And we're going on a slightly different tact on this conversation for the Halloween special, as you seem to be the queen of Halloween on Mysteries and Monsters for me. I think this is the third year in a row we've done something on Halloween, Ruth.
I think it might be, yes. I like that, Queen of Halloween. I think I might adopt that.
I will happily let you have that, no problems at all. And so, obviously, you're renowned through the body of work that you've done. As I said on the introduction, we've another volume of These Haunted Times on its way, which we'll talk about later in the show, because that's a very interesting departure from the previous entries of the series, and obviously everything else you've ever written so far. But we've never really delved into your haunted times, as it were, really, and your haunted life. And I know one of the key things that interested me the very first time I heard you speak on a podcast with Howard Hughes several years ago. I'm not sure if it was 2018, Ruth, or 2019. It's around that.
2018, yeah.
And it always struck me about you on that was sharing some of the incredible experiences that you had along with your sort of early days of your career now, because obviously you're a very prolific writer as well. So it seems a long time both for the material you've done, and obviously in the world of podcasts, it's a million years ago. I mean, my show didn't even exist when you made that appearance.
Good Lord, did it not?
No, we didn't. I always talk about it like I'm the Queen or something. I didn't. They have done it again. My first episode was released on the 28th of March, 2019.
Oh, my goodness. Well, yes, that must have been before then, because I'm pretty sure it was 2018, the first time I was on Howard Hughes, because I think I'd just released the first roadmap.
Yes.
So, yeah, wow, blimey, look at that. How long have we been going, eh?
I know.
And how many episodes have you done since then?
Well, this will be coming out, obviously, Halloween, which I think will be episode 315. So 315 episodes.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah, plus the I think I've done 140 episodes of the Ghost Story Guys as well.
Yeah, and I've got a bone to pick with you about that.
Right. Well, let's get that out of the way.
Let's get that out of the way. I've been listening to that on back catalogue over the past couple of months, because I love to listen to podcasts whilst I'm doing the housework or driving somewhere. rather than listening to music at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm working my way through the back catalogue. And, every time you mention me in it, which is in ones that I'm not necessarily appearing in, but you've referenced my work a few times, and you say, and Ruth Roper Wylde, and I feel like it's my mum full naming me. And I'll be driving along or pushing the Hoover or whatever I'm doing, and I'll literally jump and look over my shoulder with this guilty look on my face. Like, what have I done? And it's just the surprise of being full named.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
So yes, every time you do that, you can imagine me jumping somewhere and looking guilty.
Right. I shall make sure we try and do that more.
No, don't.
So yes, so your appearance on Howard, you were talking about your early life and your experiences, and it's quite strange, I think, sometimes when I love to go back and listen to classic episodes of a lot of the shows that I've been a regular listener to. I mean, Howard was one of those that I discovered I say really early on. I think he'd done about 50 episodes when I started listening to him, because my brother was a big fan of him. And when I look back at some of them, I'm thinking, gosh, this is like 2010, 2011. And some of the shows I used to listen to then just don't exist. They're not even on the internet anymore. And it makes you scratch your head and you think just how many conversations have been about the paranormal in that period of sort of 14, 15 years now. And you think who's carried on all the way through it. And you have people like Jim Harold, who's sort of omnipresent in the world of paranormal podcasting. But it does sometimes surprise me when I look at some of the episodes I listen to, and they're from like 2012, 2013, and you think, goodness me, how much has changed since then?
It has, though, hasn't it? At least I didn't burst on the scene until 2017. I was a bit of a latecomer. But I've been going like great guns ever since. This is book 9 I'm writing, so...
Yes. Me and you both.
Mad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Late bloomers, Ruth.
Absolutely.
That's what we are.
And why not? We stored it up for years and years, and then out it all came.
Yes. It's the best way to deal with a midlife crisis, I feel.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely, definitely.
So now when we look back, really, a bit like myself, and I've said this with a few people over the years, Ruth, when I've spoken to them, sometimes when we look back and we've worked in the media, or we've written books, or we've made documentaries, or people have appeared on TV shows and stuff, sometimes for us it almost seems as if the paranormal's always been with us, and no matter what we've tried to do professionally and personally, eventually will track us down and say, no, you now need to pay attention. I am what you are.
Yes. And I am what you're most interested in. You just can't leave this subject alone, because it will keep popping up until you pay attention.
Yes. Like an itch you can't scratch, I think.
Yeah, very much.
I mean, when you look back, very similar to me, I think it was one of those things that it was around me, but I think sometimes you don't realise it. And sometimes when you look at the world through a child's eyes, you take things more innocently on board. I think you're not suspicious that perhaps seeing something that shouldn't be there is unusual until someone says, well, that didn't happen, or, well, we don't have any animals here, or, well, there was nobody in when that happened. And so for you, I remember when you were speaking with Howard, you were talking about this incredible encounter with these kittens, I think they were, Ruth?
It was. I think Howard had asked the question, what's your earliest memory, or something like that. I think that was the question. And I think I was only about 4 years old when this happened, because I don't think my brother was on the scene, and he's 5 years younger than me. And so my memory of the day obviously is through the lens of a 4-year-old, if you like.
Yeah.
And it's a patchy memory for most of the day, but the actual kittens is a very clear memory. And I know my sister, who's older than me, also shares the memory very clearly. So we'd gone to visit some friends of our parents somewhere in Shropshire, I think, who lived in a little old cottage. I can't for the life of me remember who the people were, or what significance they were to my parents. I don't remember much of being there, other than when it came to bedtime, which I presume would have been early evening because we were both very little. We were put to bed in what would have been the dining room, but was kind of, in the old cottages, they have the best parlour.
Yes.
it would have been that kind of room, and it was quite a dark, low-ceilinged, heavy old furniture sort of room, but quite a small, pokey room. And they'd put one of those truckle beds up for us to sleep in, you know, like a folding, very old-style camp bed. But we were absolutely fascinated because there was a real coal fire in the room. And the lady of the house had lit the fire, you know, earlier, and then sort of let it stoke down into hot embers, and there was a grate round it to keep us safe. But it was to keep the room warm, because obviously there won't have been anything like central heating or anything. This was years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
It would have been in the late 1960s, I think. And so we settled down top and tail in the bed, as they say. So, you know, one's head on the pillow, the other one's head on a pillow down the other end of the bed.
Yeah.
And we were sort of chatting quietly and trying to stay awake, because we were fascinated by the fire, because our own house had central heating, and we'd never ever been in a room with a real fire before. So, you know, as little kids, it was just like magical that there was an actual fire in the room. And we were getting very sleepy when the door creaked open and 2 cats came in, kittens, or young cats, not tiny kittens, but neither were they full-grown cats. They were sort of young kittens, young cats, both grey in colour. And I mean, this was just all our Christmases come true at once, because we weren't allowed pets at home.
Yeah.
And, you know, nobody knew these kittens had come in to see us, so nobody was going to take them away or tell us we couldn't play with them if we kept quiet. So we sort of, you know, did that very quiet, encouraged them up onto the bed sort of thing, which we would not have been allowed if anybody had spotted us. And these 2 grey kittens jumped up onto the bed, and we were in 7th heaven. We were in this room. If you picture the room, there was no light on, so it was just lit by the embers of the fire, which was a coal fire. So you know how coal fires go to quite bright embers, don't they?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, that's still quite a dim light through the room. It's heavy old furniture, so quite a dark, cosy feel to the room. And the cats themselves were grey, so you can kind of picture how that lighting was. And we got sleepier and sleepier, just playing with the cats on the bedspread between us. And they started jumping over each other and sort of, you know, playing around on the bed, and one would jump over the other. And every time they jumped, instead of being like a cat jumping and landing on 4 feet, it would be a cat as it jumped in the air, and then in mid-flight, as it was over the head of the one it was jumping over, it would kind of smear out. So it landed on its front paws, but its back paws had kind of smeared into a trail of smoke behind it.
Yeah.
And then it would sort of reform on the bed, and the other one would jump and do the same thing. And we were just absolutely mesmerised by this. It was really pretty to watch as they jumped over and kind of did this weird smearing thing. And as kids, you don't question that sort of thing. You're just entranced by it, because, you know, we've never been allowed a cat in the room before. For all we knew, this is what cats were meant to do.
Yes, yes.
And we fell asleep with the kittens in there. You know, at some point we fell asleep, but we both remember that weird smearing thing. So next morning dawns. I remember being in the kitchen, and she was serving us a type of cereal that had hot milk with it, which I was again fascinated by, because we didn't have cereal with hot milk at home. And she was pouring it out of a big jug that was one of those old-fashioned jugs with the blue and white stripes around it, that you sort of got in every farmhouse kitchen in England at one time. Yes. And there was a big old ginger Tom, big fat thing, curled up on the rocking chair in front of the fire in the kitchen, because being a cottage, each room had a fireplace. Yeah. And I turned to the lady, whose name I can't for the life of me remember, and said, "Oh, could we play with the kittens?" Because obviously this big fat lazy ginger thing wasn't going to play with us. And I remember her looking at me and looking really shocked and saying, "What kittens, love?" And I said, "Well, the grey kittens that came in to play with us last night." And there was this sort of moment of, no, they're not here. No, it was all kind of as if I'd said something wrong. Yes. I can't quite remember now whether it was then or after that. But anyway, she had these 2 kittens, and they'd both been killed on the road outside as young cats. They'd never made it to full adulthood. So she only had the big ginger Tom left. And nobody had ever mentioned the kittens to us. You know, we hadn't been told there were going to be kittens or anything like that.
Yeah.
So she was just, I remember the look of shock on her face that we were describing cats of hers that were deceased.
Yeah.
And yet we'd been playing with them the night before.
Mm.
And I didn't remember reacting to that statement very much because, again, young children, you just don't, do you? The whole world is a wonder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like I say, we were just fascinated by the hot milk for the cereal, let alone anything paranormal or anything like that. You know, everything is a wonder when you're a kid, and you just, unless an adult makes a fuss about it, which I don't remember them making a fuss. They just kind of said, "Oh no, they're not here anymore. They've gone now." It just dismissed it like that. And I was just disappointed I couldn't play with them. That was my only takeaway from the day. But when you look back as an adult, and certainly my sister and I talked about that in later life, you know, you sort of think actually they were probably ghosts.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't realise it at the time. We didn't think about it at the time. But that was probably my first experience with the paranormal, I think. And a nice one as well.
Yes, very much so. I mean, it's a lovely memory. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it, when you look back? I suppose sometimes you can look back on, as you've just mentioned about discussing it with your sister there, Ruth. Did she act surprised because, obviously, as you say, you found out that the cats had actually sadly died in an accident? Or was she aware that they'd keep coming back and she'd seen them as well? That makes me even more intrigued about her reaction, because it would have been very, I mean, I suppose we sometimes look back at the past and think, oh, well, people just told children the truth all the time and they weren't bothered if it upset them. It's a very strange reaction to a fairly sad reality that when I was growing up, it was something, you know, kids were not protected from these things. There was always that pet's gone to live on a farm, which, you know, you get to about 10 or 11, you kind of work out what's happened there.
Yes.
But for her to just sort of say, oh, no, they're not here now, seems, for me, I'm not sure if she was either just trying to be very polite or she was shocked that somebody else could see these ghost cats visiting.
I really, really don't know which that was. I was too little to pass out what an adult was reacting or thinking, if you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely.
I was just, I can't play with the kittens, you know.
Rubbish.
Damn it.
Yeah.
But I do remember her being really surprised that I mentioned them. You know, sort of, which I wasn't expecting, of course, because they, as far as we were concerned, they were real kittens that had been in to play with us the night before. I do just remember her absolute surprise. And yeah, who knows? It's a shame I can't remember who she was, and unfortunately my parents are long since gone. So I don't know who she was. So I wouldn't suppose she'd still be alive by now, because she was quite elderly when we visited her. You know, to know whether there was any backstory to that or not, I have no idea. Absolutely no idea. Or whether it was the first time the kittens had appeared and she was just thrilled that they had. Who knows? Don't know. But like I say, it's a memory that's a really nice memory, because I can still clearly picture that heavy, dark room with the bright ember light glinting through it. You know, really cosy, tucked up, warm sort of feeling in the room, you know. And getting to go to sleep with playing with these cats that were like smoke, you know, little kids' heaven. Especially because we weren't allowed pets at home, and wow, you know, we were allowed the cats on the bed. It was great.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, it's one of those strange mysteries of childhood, I think, Ruth, because you always seem to go to people's houses that when you get to about 18 or 19, you're like, who were these people and why do we never see them anymore or hear about them? Who are they?
Yeah, who were they? Who knows?
I've got lots of foggy memories of going all over the place, and half the people I've no idea, and we never talk. They're never mentioned in the family, so I've no idea what was going on. And
have you noticed that part of the problem, because I mean, I presume your childhood was sort of up north area, mine certainly was, and up north everybody's called Auntie so and so or Uncle so and so, whether or not they happen to be an auntie or an uncle. So in later life, when you're trying to pass out who it was that you knew as a child, you really have no clue whether they were an actual aunt or uncle or actually related or not, because everybody was given that honorific.
Yes.
So, I mean, I remember the couple that lived up the road from us when we lived in Leeds were auntie and uncle, and they were literally nothing to do with our family. They were just neighbours. But because they used to let me go and play with their dog, you know, I knew them as Auntie Connie and Uncle Bert. You know, it's only years later you realise that it is just an honorific. These people aren't actually related to you.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, it makes it even harder to know who you were or weren't visiting, because they were all aunts and uncles.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's a challenging time, I think, and it's just very common. It's a strange thing. I mean, it still goes on now. I know it's not so bad as it used to be these days. You know, I've got a lot of friends who've got children, and over the sort of last 20 years, I've gone from, you know, you go from being Uncle so-and-so to just your name these days. So I'm not sure. I think it is one of those old traditions that do children, is it to show a little bit of respect from the child, or is it just one of those that it kind of makes them seem warmer rather than a stranger? I'm not sure.
Or is it a way to designate that this is a safe adult? I don't know.
Yes, maybe.
When the child's little, you know, if the parents introduce them as aunt or uncle, then they're a safe adult, maybe.
I mean, that's a whole conversation for another
day and another type of podcast.
Yes. One, I don't have the intellect nor the psychological insight to understand how that works, I think.
No, same as.
I think looking at your paranormal contacts, it seems that being up north was sort of just a gentle introduction. I'm deeply intrigued by this very strange story, though, from Leeds, of this upside down green person, Ruth.
Well, this is one of those things that for most of my life I dismissed this as just childish fancy. But now in later life, with all the stories that I collect with my research for the books, and with listening to, you know, other people who are collecting information like yourselves, other podcasts and everything, you know, with all the research you do, you start to look back at some of these things and think, I wonder whether that wasn't imagination. So what this was when I was about 4, maybe, we moved to Leeds. We'd been in Lancashire for a while. I was actually born in France because my parents were in the RAF, so they were stationed. So when we came back to the UK, we started off in Lancashire and then we moved to Leeds. I'm not quite sure of the dates, to be honest. But we had a house in Leeds that was a typical semi-detached house. It was on the corner, so it had a slightly bigger garden because it had the side of the property as well. And my bedroom for quite a while was the smallest room in the house. My sister had, you know, the smallest bedroom. My sister had the bigger room. And it was there that, pretty sure it was there that my brother had either just been born or, I think he might well have been born either just before we moved out of Lancashire or just after we got to Yorkshire, can't remember. But I remember this particular night, it was coming up for Christmas, because we were excited, my sister and we were wanting to look out of the window to look for Father Christmas coming.
Yes.
Because we were hoping, you know, we'd see his sleigh and the reindeer and what have you. So I was that kind of age where you really believe in that. And it must have been fairly early in the evening because we were put to bed early, you know, and we'd already been told off a couple of times for talking and chattering and not getting into bed. My sister had sneaked into my room. And we'd opened the curtains, which we weren't supposed to do because we were supposed to be going to sleep.
Yes.
And both of us saw, I want to say lady, but the more I picture what we saw, I don't know why we thought she was a lady, because it was a person whose skin was quite bright green, who suddenly peered down at us by leaning down and looking through the top of the window as if they were somehow perched on the wall above the window. So they were hanging downwards and looking through it with their head upside down.
Yeah.
And she had, obviously it looked like dealy boppers on her head, or what later, you'd know as Dee Dee Boppers.
Yes.
Two odd things sticking out of her head. Can't really describe any better than that.
Yeah.
Don't remember any hair. Quite big wide eyes, and was smiling at us in quite a friendly way. Like, haha, you've seen me now because you shouldn't have opened the curtains. As if it was a bit of a joke somehow. That's the feeling it gave me. And like, oh, we're in trouble now because we knew we shouldn't have opened the curtains. And so we sort of squeaked and slammed the curtains shut. And we both saw her. And like I say, all my life, I put that down to, it's just childish imagination, or we were winding each other up, or perhaps I've dreamt it, But the more I think about other people that I hear talking about strange things they see when they're children, that you sort of grow out of as an adult. So you dismiss them as having not been anything. And I wonder just how many of us have weird little snippets like that have no particular meaning, don't particularly fit into anything. Nothing much happened. This person just grinned at us through the window and we closed the curtains. That was really all that happened. But is it real? And are children seeing things? When you think about sprites or boggarts or even if you want to talk about aliens or anything, entities of any kind, are children more open to seeing because they haven't yet set parameters for the world? Because we definitely do that. The older we get, if something doesn't fit into our world view, we're better at dismissing it the older we get.
Yeah.
Whereas children, everything's new and everything's wild-eyed and wonderful, isn't it? The first time you see a rabbit, the first time you see a cow, the first time you see a train, it's all amazing. And how many little snippets like this just get lost in the amazingness of everything. And then later you dismiss the memory of it because you learn that, yes, cows exist and tractors exist and trains exist, but strange little green creatures smiling at you through the window don't. So you just dismiss that memory. Or was it just a memory? Who knows? Who knows? I just know what I can picture in my mind's eye from that night. Very odd.
It is, but I think that's an intriguing thought, though, because I'm always frustrated whenever I hear somebody dismiss anything a child witnesses, claims to experience, or says they've seen based on the information, usually that, essentially based on the fact that this is a child saying this, and therefore, for some reason, depending on what a child tells an adult, the adult will dismiss it out of hand. And I often wonder, where is that line? Because unfortunately, there will be awful events based in reality that a child will try and share with people. And therefore, you have to wonder, well, is the reality of seeing a strange creature or having a strange experience, like seeing pets that don't exist or whatever, is that to some people less believable than saying something else untoward has been occurring or something of that effect, Ruth? And we often seem to dismiss it. And the thing about this is I'm constantly amazed sometimes and rather creeped out on occasion when I read about children's imaginary friends and some of the stories that you can find online that parents have shared about their children, and some of the pictures you can see that they've drawn.
That they've drawn, yeah.
Which some of them are jaw-droppingly terrifying, I have to say. There's one that's always stayed with me about one child who drew this lady who came to visit her all the time, and she was just covered in blood. But the child seemed to be quite fine with. I mean, this is the other thing sometimes I think. Children seem to take rather shockingly looking images very well, as though it, like you've just said there, if you saw a strange creature peering at you upside down with sort of dealy boppers, because it's almost insectoid looking.
Yeah, almost.
Like they've got little antennas on or something, and especially with you saying big eyes, that's not the kind of thing you would be used to seeing. And so, in the scheme of things, you reacted quite calmly. You were more worried about being spotted looking out the window than anything else, not the fact that you've got some strange upside-down woman with dealy boppers peering back at you, smiling.
But I still think that's because, as a very small child, you haven't yet been taught a frame of reference that says there shouldn't be a person upside down staring through your window. You kind of learn that kind of what not to talk about as you get older, or what people. And like, you know, talking about imaginary friends, so many adults will say to kids, yeah, you know, it's time to give up your imaginary friend, their own imagination. You know, and I see so many accounts about what children experience with researching for the books, and it does make you re-examine your own childhood and think, so at what point did I realise that actually there's something really odd about that memory? I couldn't tell you which point I suddenly thought of that. It would have been some point in my adulthood. But I don't think children think of it like that, because they haven't yet. You know, if you imagine, like, the first time you take a kid to see a real cow, you know, if you live somewhere not so rural, and it means, you know, a little drive out to a field, or a walk to the end of the lane where the field is, or whatever. They're not there, you know, you're not living on a farm, in other words. And you're like, come on, like, here's a cow, look. And there's this big creature that moves and tromps on the grass. And if you then walked away with that kid and then said, oh no, that was just imaginary, would it actually be possible? Well, I'm sure it would be possible to persuade the child that no, cows aren't real. We didn't really go to see a cow, because it's all about learned experience, isn't it? And if that child never saw a cow again, then they may well end up thinking that cows are imaginary. Do you see what I mean? You know, it's just, I think it's about learned experience. You know, we learn what we're not supposed to see as we get older. And we learn what's acceptable to see or not see. And that, of course, leads into the whole question of, do some of us see more than other people do? You know, because there are definitely stories of children, without a doubt, who see things that the adults around them can't see. I've got loads of examples of those in my books. And is that every child does that? Or are some childs more perceptive than others? I think it would take, like you say, somebody with the right kind of qualification to do a proper study into that, about children's imaginary friends. Are they really that imaginary? Who knows? It's a bit of a scary thought, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence with this, because obviously there will always be situations where children will create a fantasy world or whatever, due to personal circumstances, whatever. There are all kinds of reasons why somebody creates a world in their own mind on occasions, Ruth. I fail to believe that every single incident involving every single child is purely imagination. That, to me, just doesn't make sense. There's a brilliant book, and I forgot the name of the guy who wrote it, called Invisikids, which has recently been re-released in the last year or so by Fortean Press. Centre of Fortean Zoology's publishing arm. And that is chock full of incredibly weird stories of children's imaginary friends, some of whom the parents have said, well, the child was seeing something and there were other weird things going on in the house at the same time. I remember Kev from We Need to Talk About Ghosts telling me and Brennan once this really weird story about, I can't remember if it was a relative who'd got an aggressive imaginary friend who had a certain name, who essentially was trying to get her to cause herself serious harm, to the point that a ball was thrown into a busy road and she was encouraged to chase after it by this imaginary friend.
Oh, wow.
And Kev and whoever was involved kind of dismissed it as just a child acting up or whatever, until Kev then came across another story and the imaginary friend was called exactly the same thing. And it was a really weird name. Like something like Zazu or Zizo or something that a kid knocking about the streets of Liverpool or Merseyside would not be plucking out of the air, you know?
Yeah, and to have two kids pluck it out of the air.
From completely different parts of the country as well, Ruth. They weren't even close.
And also be scary for them. Yeah, that's odd, isn't it?
Yeah, and so I think, as with any weird phenomena, it only takes one incident to be real to make to prove something strange is going on. I have a lot of time for some of the experiences that parents and children as they grow up talk about happening, because it can't all just be pretend. I'm sorry, no. I'm not having that.
No, and I definitely know that on one instance, I'm certain it wasn't pretend, because somebody else saw what I was seeing. And that was when we moved to Suffolk.
Yes.
And now I would have been maybe 7, when we moved to Suffolk. And the property we lived in down there was a bungalow set in its own grounds. And it was one of 5 bungalows that was set in what had been the grounds of the prison where one of the last public hangings in Britain took place. And it was the hanging of the Red Barn murderer, I think.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. So the whole property was known as the Fort.
Mm-hmm.
And all that remained of the prison that had been there was the big front wall, which is a really high, 20-odd foot high wall, which had been the frontage to the prison, and then the central tower of the prison, which was a octagonal tower. And that octagonal tower had been redeveloped into old people's homes, I think. There was a couple of flats for, like warden controlled.
Yes.
The tower used to have wings that went off it, but they'd all long since been demolished. And in the grounds were these 5 modern bungalows. And our bungalow was the furthest down from the entrance. So I used to walk home from school. I almost never walked home with my sister. She was, 18 months older than me and didn't want to hang around with kid sister as you don't at that age. And whenever I turned into the gate, which is a gateway, there wasn't an actual gate, of this big wall at the front, immediately behind the wall was a stand of big old trees. And you walk down the sort of tarmacy, gravelly drive, and you went past the first bungalow on your left, and then there was the octagonal tower, and then you went past the next 3 bungalows scattered on either side, and ours was the last you got to. And every time, well, not every time, but nearly every time I came home from school from a certain range of ages, it seemed to stop as I got a bit older. I'd walk through that entranceway and there would be a dog waiting for me. And the dog would walk me all the way down to our bungalow and then trot off. And I knew it wasn't a real dog, but I also knew it was kind of my dog, even though we weren't allowed pets, so I'd never had a dog. The weird thing was that sometimes it was a black and white collie and sometimes it was a white Alsatian-y sort of thing. And I assumed I was kind of making it up. It was my imaginary friend. And I'd look forward to seeing him, and it was always a him. I'd look forward to seeing him waiting there for me, and I'd put my hand on his back and we'd walk down together. And as we got to where my bungalow was, he'd disappear off. And I kind of knew he was imaginary. He wasn't real. Until one day, my sister and I shared a bedroom up in the converted loft of the bungalow, and she woke me in the middle of the night by screaming. So I sort of jolted awake, like, what the heck? And sort of looked across at her, and she was ever so upset because she'd woken up, just, happened to wake up in the middle of the night, had looked across at my bed to see if it was me that had woken her up, and had seen a white Alsatian sitting beside my bed. And I had never told anybody about my ghost dogs, which is how I thought of them. I thought of them as my ghost dogs. And I'd never told anybody about them because I thought they were imaginary. And yet my sister had just seen him sitting there. And that always stuck with me afterwards, that, well, how come somebody else is seeing him then? He's not imaginary if somebody else can see him. And I only saw him a handful of times after that. He seemed to fade out and go then, which was a real shame because I really liked walking along with him. But that was a very odd place anyway, that Suffolk house. We had quite a few odd things happen there. I was playing out, as I said, the bungalow sat in the middle of its own grounds, so there was gardens all the way round it that belonged to the bungalow. And I was playing out the front on my own, and again, we weren't allowed pets, and I always wanted a pet. And I was only ever so little when this happened. I must only have been about 6. And what I thought was a grey dog with a black and white stripy face came trotting into the garden quite slowly and made its way past where I was playing, sitting on the grass. I used to play with little plastic farm animals. I used to love playing with them in the grass, spend hours at it. And it came walking past me, so I stood up and put my hand on its back and walked with it while it walked quite a big garden, walked all along the edge of the flower beds, and then eventually went under the hedge that went to the woods that were behind where our bungalow was. And I was so happy that this stripy-faced dog had let me stroke it that I went running in to see my mum and was like, oh, mummy, the dog let me stroke it. And she's like, what dog, love? To the dog that just came in our garden. She said, what are you talking about? There's been a dog in the garden, let me stroke it. It's gone under the hedge. So she would show me. So she came out. Now, my mum was born on a farm, country girl all her life, and she had me show her where this dog had gone. And she was looking at the ground for prints, and she found the footprints of, in the dirt where I'd walked along beside it. And she sort of looked at me and said, describe this dog again. I said, well, it was grey and he had a black and white face. And it was a badger.
Yes.
This old badger had walked into our garden and allowed a child to walk alongside it with my hand on its back while it wandered off. And she said, I don't know whether it's true or not, but she said to me at the time that badgers are known, like elephants go off to die, and
yes.
the elephants' graveyards. Apparently badgers do a similar thing. And when they know that they're going to die, they leave the set and wander off on their own. And she thinks that's what it was doing, that it was actually nearing the end of its life. And that's why it was calm and let me touch it. Because she could clearly see from the prints that it had been a badger, and a real badger, that let me walk along beside it in the garden and touch it. And of course, I just thought it was a dog because I was only little, and everything was a dog if it was furry and not a cat.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, badgers are known for being a little grumpy. They're not as badly behaved as some people make out, though I have got a friend who was once cornered in a farmer's field by a very grumpy badger for an hour or so until she could hop over the fence to get away from it.
I mean, they can be quite aggressive if challenged or if they feel threatened.
Yes.
But even if they're not being aggressive, their other default behaviour is very elusive.
Yes.
So I know of a badger set about a mile from my house here. And I know it's a badger set, but I have never yet seen the badgers that live in it, and yet it's quite a big set. And I've lived in this house for 20 odd years, and I have never seen the badgers because, they're usually very, very elusive.
Yes.
So you either see them and stay away from them because they're cornered and they're being a bit aggressive, or you just don't see them. Or sadly, you see them dead at the side of the road. And that's really mostly the only time you see a badger, unless you go actually out badger watching and are prepared to sit and, wait through the night to see one, sort of thing. And this was broad daylight because I was a little kid playing in the lawn. But yeah, it did. It came into the garden and let me stroke it. So my mum said at the time that she thought it must have been off on its way to die. But who knows? But that was, we definitely had a couple of ghosts in that house. And weirdly, they were clearly nothing to do with the prison grounds, because both of them were dressed in modern dress. And it was a modern bungalow, but built on such old grounds, because the prison dated back to, 1700s at least.
Yeah.
My mum saw the lady on 2 separate occasions and described her. So she was always wearing one of those A-line style skirts, that were very sort of 1970s.
Yes.
No real shape to it.
Yes.
Just a waistband and a skirt sort of thing that flared out a bit. And, a sort of tight-fitting sweater of some sort. And our bungalow had a more or less L-shaped hallway off which all the rooms led, with it being a bungalow. And each room only had the one door into it. The only room that had an external exit was the lounge, which had patio doors out into the garden. But every other room, once you went into the room from the hallway, there was no exit except to climb out of a window. And twice, whilst home alone, she'd be working like hoovering or dusting or whatever, and she'd see this woman walk down the hallway past the open doorway, whichever room she was in. And she went chasing out into the hallway, sort of shouting after her, oi, who are you? What are you doing in the house, sort of thing? Because she just looked like an ordinary lady walking past in modern dress. And this was in daytime. And she'd see the woman turn into the last bedroom at the end of the L-shaped corridor. And she'd sort of, go running into the bedroom after her, and there'd be nobody there. And she told me about that on two occasions she saw her. I never saw her, but we did also have a little boy who looked to be about 4 or 5 years old. So just a little bit older than my brother was at that point. And he was always seen wearing, little boy shorts and a little boy T-shirt sort of thing. Again, quite modern dress. And he was nearly always seen in the bathroom at the end of the hallway, standing at the toilet with his back to you as if he was having a pee. And you'd walk past and sort of clock him out the corner of your eye and think it was my brother there. And then you'd walk into whatever room you were going into, and there would be my brother playing. And so, huh? And sort of, step back out and look back down the corridor, and there'd be nobody there in the bathroom. And I saw him twice, and I know a couple of the rest of the family saw him on a couple of occasions, and always hanging around that bathroom. Now, who they were or why they were there, no idea, because it was a modern bungalow. We definitely saw them. And then the last thing that I remember for the Suffolk house, this was a really odd one. My father used to ride vintage motorbikes in trial events at the weekends. And the day this happened, I can't remember whether he'd bought a little van or had hired a little van to use to go to the event that weekend. But for whatever reason, this little van was parked on our driveway, and it was the size of what you'd think of as a postman Pat van.
Yes.
So just one of those little small vans, just big enough to push a motorbike into the back of it.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in the kitchen. We had a big kitchen. The bungalow had windows that were lead light windows, where there's like that diamond cross leaded windows. Yes. Modern, but made to look old, And I was sitting at the table colouring, playing with my crayons. My mum was washing up. It was one of those days where big heavy thunderstorms kept coming over, and then it would go all sunny and hot in between, which is why I was playing indoors. My sister had a friend of hers round to play, and the two of them had asked Mum if they could go and play in the van. And she'd said yes, they could, as long as they didn't break anything or, what have you. So they were sitting in the front of the van pretending to go, drive the van and what have you. And from my perspective, sitting in the house, what I saw was another one of these storms came over, sort of, sudden, heavy, squally thunderstorm that you get in summer, or used to. And my mum suddenly flinging open the kitchen window and shouting at my sister and her friend on the driveway, "Stay in the van, don't move, stay in the van, get back, don't open the door, stay in the van, lock the doors." And I kind of looked up at my mum in astonishment, and I was ever so little, and immediately felt scared and worried, like, why was my mum shouting out the window? What was wrong? This squall passed over. My sister and her friend came running into the house, all upset and tearful and squeaky. What they had seen was they were playing in the van, sitting in the two front seats of the van, one of them pretending to drive, when the squall came up behind the van, so came at them from behind. They pretended they were going to put the windscreen washers on and went to look in the mirrors, because they were pretending they were driving, and they saw a cloaked, hooded figure come up behind the van and peer into the little back windows in the back door of the van at them. And both of them started screaming, went to get out of the van, at which point my mum screamed at them, "Get back in the van, stay in the van, don't get out of the van, lock the doors." And the figure walked on past, the whole length of the van, staying with the sort of leading edge of the squall of rain.
Yeah.
And then just passed on out of the garden and disappeared with the rain. And they came in all sort of squeaky and upset. And "Did you see it? Did you see it, Mum? Did you see it?" And she was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just telling you to stay in the van because I didn't want you to get wet." And I remember looking at her, even as a little tiny kid, and thinking, but you were really scared because it scared me that you were scared, Mum.
Yeah.
And children do pick up on adults' moods, don't they?
Yes.
And I know she was scared, and I know she said, lock the door. So and she insisted that, when we tried to talk about it in later life, she would always insist there was nothing. I just didn't want them to get wet. But I know she saw something and wouldn't talk about it. And I actually have my suspicions about what she did see. Because when I was older, my maternal grandmother, so my mum's mum, she had lived on a farm all her life until, later life sort of thing, until my grandfather died, basically. And then she'd had to, move off the farm, what have you, because they lived in a tied cottage because he was just a farm labourer. And she was a proper countryside woman, a lot of the old lore of the countryside. And she and I would go on long walks together, and she taught me all sorts about what trees are what and how the spring works and, what flower's called what and what bird is called what and so on. And she taught me how to hear snow coming. So to this day, I can hear a snowstorm coming because the wind makes a very specific noise ahead of a snowstorm. And I remember her telling me in later life, so after this incident, about storm elementals. And she and I were out walking in the countryside, and it was another day, similar sort of weather, where those big summer storms pass by, and you can see that if you're out in the countryside, you can see them passing by on the horizon, but they miss you, the ones I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
And she pointed one out to me one day. This was probably about 5 years or so after this incident, so I must have been around about 10-ish. And she said, you see that kind of storm there, love? I said, yeah. She said, you've got to be very careful if you see one of them coming, because that type of storm particularly has the storm walker walking with it. And I was, what on earth is a storm walker? It's the storm elemental. It's the elemental that walks with the storm, and they can be quite dangerous. So if it's that kind of storm you see, and she sort of, she's pointing out how the clouds looked and how the coloration of the clouds looked. If you see that kind of storm, best to stay indoors or stay away from it if you can. And that, I then thought, oh my God, my mum will have known that then.
Yes.
Because this is her mum. And no doubt her mum taught her this when she was a child. So when she saw that thing walking at the van, she knew what she was looking at, and that's why she was scared. But she never admitted it. My mum would never admit it. She's long since passed now. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that they saw a storm. I didn't see it, but I'm pretty sure they saw a storm elemental that day. I only saw my mum's reaction to it.
That's got to be a very specific bit of folklore, Ruth, because I've never heard of a stonewalker anywhere.
No.
I know, there's a very tenuous link to the famous grey ghost. I think it's North Carolina, who turns up when there's a hurricane coming and helps, sort of guides people to safety and things. But I've never heard of that. And like you say, the whole reaction of your mum, why would you tell children to lock the car doors?
Yeah.
You just tell them to stay in there. As far as I'm aware, locking the door doesn't make it more waterproof, does it?
Nope, absolutely not.
And there's no
reason for her to be scared either. Even if they had jumped out and run to the house, they'd only got a bit wet.
Yeah.
But what made me feel scared, because I'm a small child sitting at the table colouring in with my crayons, what made me feel scared was that my mum was scared.
Yeah.
And I heard the panic in her voice, and I heard her say, lock the doors. And I couldn't see out the window because they were higher than I was, so I couldn't see what she was looking at. So, yeah, I just remember her fear. And it was fear. She was afraid.
Yeah.
And looking back as an adult on that, I doubly think she was afraid, because if it was an ordinary level of fear, she would have run out to the kids.
Yes.
But she herself was just stay in, lock the doors, it'll be fine, it'll move on sort of thing. Like you might react if there was a bear wandering past and you knew that if everybody just stayed indoors, it would wander on past and go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I say, it was only years later that I put two and two together with that one, with what my grandmother taught me. But like I say, my grandmother was very much of old country folklore type.
Yeah.
She taught me how to make poppy dolls.
Yes.
And I still make a poppy doll every year. And I've never seen anybody else make a poppy doll the way I was taught to. with an actual poppy flower to make a doll out of an actual poppy flower.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anybody else do that. But it was obviously something that she'd been taught as a child, and my mum had been taught it. So she had a lot of these kind of old country lore things, and she was absolutely right about hearing snow. I can very accurately predict when a snowstorm's going to hit because I can hear it in the wind.
Yeah.
Because she spent ages teaching me how to hear it in the wind. And it is a very specific noise that it makes.
Yeah, yeah. I know I freak some of my friends out sometimes. I can smell thunderstorms.
My husband can smell snow, funnily enough.
Yeah, I know when there's a thunderstorm coming, I can smell them.
Yeah.
This sounds really weird, but I can.
I absolutely believe you, because my husband can smell snow coming. Because there'll be him coming home from work saying, "Oh, did you hear the snow today? Because I smelt it." Anybody listening to Snow are barking. But, he can hear, he can smell the change in the air, and I can hear the difference the wind makes. And I can tell from the noise the wind is making whether it's going to be a light snowstorm or a heavy snowstorm.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of credit in things like this. I think these are the kind of things that the modern age of science has tried to knock out of people, but more often than not, there's a lot of truth in some of these folkland traditions and customs, Ruth. I think often, like we were saying earlier on before we started, my granddad always taught me that if there was a rainstorm coming, to water your plants. Little things like that. And you like you said, people just look at you baffled and say, well, what's the point in doing that? But you have to water your ground to make it soft, so when it does rain, it keeps the water in. It doesn't just run off
and cause a flood. Yeah,
and cause a flood. And so there's so many of these little customs and traditions and things that I think often get poo-pooed until something occurs that makes people that. And there are hundreds of people all over the place who can, like you say, can sense certain things or feel different things. And it's almost as if they've got a real connection with nature, or they just have somebody who takes the time to tell them the subtle differences, because there will be marked differences in temperature, aroma, noise. And if you can be taught to recognise the changes that precede something, then essentially that proves that there's it's not magic, it's set in stone. It will always be the same.
Yeah, and it's just a law of observation, if you like. That when this happens, that is going to follow on afterwards, And I remember having a very visceral demonstration of that when I was working as an investigator of bullying and harassment cases. And I used to travel all over the country for that. And we were always paired, well, nearly always. It was nearly always two investigators went to do an investigation. And on this particular occasion, there were two of us, and we were doing an investigation in Cardiff, in Wales. So we were staying in Cardiff for a few days to do the investigation. And like anybody who has to stay away from their job quite a lot, you get very, very bored very, very quickly of hotel rooms.
Yes.
Because once you've stayed in one, you've stayed in them all. And they become very much of a muchness. And the evenings stretch ahead of you, bored, and you just want to be at home. So all of us investigators took to knowing each other well enough to be able to go out for dinner together, so as we at least have something to do in the evenings. So this particular evening, it was a really nice sunny evening. We're in Cardiff. We're both back at the hotel by about 5-ish. We'd finished all the interviews for the day. And I said to the other investigator, a chap called Mike, I said, should we pop out to Cardiff Bay and find a pub with a garden to sit in? Because it's such a nice evening. And then we can have a nice sort of early dinner in the garden before going back to the hotel, because we both wanted an early-ish night because we got a long day the next day. Oh, that'd be nice, he said. So off we toddled, and we found this, just a random hotel, pub with a garden. But it had a magnificent view of Cardiff Bay. So we sat there in the garden, we're eating our dinner, and we're chatting away. And I just idly remarked, somebody over in Westward Ho is getting a soaking. And he looked at me like I was barking. And he sort of looked out across the bay to walk, because you can see the North Devon coast from Cardiff.
Yes.
So you can see Westward Ho and along from there. And he sort of looked out, and he looked back at me, and he looked back across the bay, and he said, I don't know what you're talking about, Ruth. Has somebody just fallen off a boat or something? And I said, oh, no, I didn't mean that. I mean, it's raining over on the North Devon coast over there. And he looked out across again, and he looked back at me, and he looked out across the bay again. It was like, how on earth can you possibly know that? And I said, because you can see the rain. And he looks again, and he looks back. He said, what do you mean you can see the rain? And I looked at him like he was barking mad and said, you see that cloud, that dark cloud?
Yep.
Yes. With the smudge underneath it? Yes. That's rain coming out of the cloud. Is it? I never knew that. And of course, I'm looking at him like he's barking mad. He's looking at me like I'm barking mad. But when we sort of realised what each of us was talking about, he had been born and lived his whole life in London.
Yeah.
So he wasn't used to looking out across a long vista of line of sight. So he had never learnt that if you look into the distance and if you see a cloud with a grey smudge under it,
right,
it's raining over there.
Yep.
Which anybody who lives out in the country knows instinctively from about 5 years old onwards.
Yes.
That if you look over there and that's where the clouds are coming from and that one's got a smudgy bottom on it, you're going to get wet soon. You know?
Yes, yes.
But he didn't have that frame of reference.
Yeah.
Because he grew up in a city. So all his knowledge, you know, where he'd be completely at home in a city and know where to find things and how to do things, and I'd be struggling a bit, we just had a different frame of reference.
Yeah.
And when you apply that realization to a much wider cultural shift away from, you know, living so hand and mouth with the countryside that my grandmother will have done, you know, being married to a very, very, very poor farm labourer who lived in a tied cottage, and they literally, you know, had more kids than they could feed, and real poverty story from poverty rural England in between the wars. The kind of knowledge that she had would be very different to a mother of 4 or 5 today growing up in a flat of, you know, a tower block of flats or something.
Yeah.
And how to raise children in that environment. That's a different level of knowledge. It's a different thing to grow up with, isn't it?
Yes.
But it doesn't make it any less valid that they knew so much about how the countryside worked.
Oh, very much so. Absolutely. I mean, I've got friends who've grown up in very rural locations. We were on the cusp of rural locations growing up, surrounded by farms and fields, and we could see the start of the Peak District on one side and the Pennines on the other route. So we, you know, it wasn't too far away. So you would always have people growing up that had these. I mean, my grandmother always used to call it country knowledge.
Yes.
And as though it was like a special talent, which now I'm of an age where I realise, well, it is. It's just that a lot of people have either ignored it or they've embraced science or technology more to confirm what's really happening. Whereas sometimes your eyes, your ears, and your nose will do the job miles ahead of it. If you know where, if you know the area and you know what to look for, you don't need to check the app to find out what the weather's going to be like in an hour, because you can see it.
Because you can see it, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
But it's strange.